This will be live. There we go. We're live. Hi, everybody. Very happy to introduce Jessica Bull. I have been so excited about this chat all day. So start us off with an introduction to you and your book.
So my name is Jessica Bull. I am a former librarian and communications consultant and an enormous Jane Austen fan and murder mystery fan. And my book, Miss Austen Investigates, was published on Thursday, and it's a murder mystery starring Jane Austen. So it begins with a young Jane Austen. She's only 19 and she's at a ball trying to enjoy a romantic moment with Tom Lefroy, a very handsome, charming young lawyer. But unfortunately, they're interrupted by the discovery of a milliner who's found bludgeoned to death. And Jane wants to solve the murder, firstly because she knew and she respected the milliner. She bought a bonnet from her, as you might expect from Jane Austen. And then secondly, when one of her brothers, Georgie, is arrested and thrown into jail for the crime, she has to solve it, otherwise he could hang for somebody else's sinister deeds.
Brilliant description, and this is why I'm so excited, because I'm a massive Jane Austen fan as well.
Brilliant.
So good. What's the reception been like to the book so far?
Yeah, it's been warm. It's been fantastic. So I think there's a lot of other Janeites, as we sometimes call ourselves, Jane Austen fans, who have been kind of really excited to hear about it. Because I think there's quite a big tradition of blending Jane Austen with crime. So I don't know if you've read P.D. James' Death Comes to Pemberley, or if you saw that when it was on TV. Did you? Yeah, I loved that. Obviously, that made a huge impact on me. And I think because, she's really interested in crime and the law and how it kind of disadvantages women. And because all of her stories are essentially mysteries where the heroine has to find out the true character of everyone around her, especially the hero. So lots of them are all about like how do you know who's telling you the truth, and how do you weigh up one person's account against another person's account. So yeah, there's been a lot of lovely reception to it from the Jane Austen kind of fan base community, and then also from people who just love classic cozy crime and murder mysteries as well. So yeah, it's been fantastic to get that interest straight away. But also it's quite nerve-wracking, obviously, because like by writing something in the tradition of Austen, you're inviting people to compare your writing to Jane Austen's writing. And obviously she's the greatest novelist who ever lived. So yeah, that can be quite tricky.
So I think the thing that stood out for me, because I sort of read up on the history of Jane Austen. I'd read all her books, but I didn't know as much about her history. So I read up on that preparing for the chat, and then when I read your book afterwards, I was like, this is really well researched, because it's got all this like history in that I've just read.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I started off like many Jane Austen fans. I started off with the adaptations. So I think I was 17 in 1995. I was just doing my A levels. And obviously 1995 is a big moment for Jane Austen fans because it's the first BBC, the first Pride and Prejudice big adaptation. Well, the first like of many. There were many beforehand, but then there were a few 90s adaptations which were really, really important in reviving her legacy and getting lots of people interested in her again. So in 1995 we had the Colin Firth and Jennifer Ehle BBC Pride and Prejudice, and then we also had the TV movie of Persuasion with is it Kieran Hines? Is it Kieran Hines? I think so. And then also the Emma Thompson Sense and Sensibility, and I think there was another Emma as well with Kate Beckinsale. So we were totally spoiled that year, and I started loving her work from that moment, and then I think over the years I kind of read every book and I'd watched every adaptation, and then by a very random set of circumstances, I ended up taking a gap year before I went to university, and I spent those few months, I wanted them to be worthwhile, so I spent them working at a school for disabled kids in Hampshire, which was just down the road actually from where Jane Austen settled in later life in Chawton. Um, and it was the late 90s. It was before the internet. There wasn't much to do. There was one bus, and I could go to Winchester, where she was buried, and I could go to Chawton, where she lived her life and sat down and wrote her novels. So it really got me thinking about her as a person and how she lived, as well as those wonderful stories. So yeah, I think it just grew from there, really.
I think the BBC adaptation of Pride and Prejudice has a lot to answer for, doesn't it, for
Yeah.
a lot of people getting drawn into.
Yeah, yeah, I think, a million English undergraduates and, fans of classic literature and maybe just even like bookworms were born in that moment when Colin Firth got out of the lake.
It is. I own that on DVD because it went off streaming, and I was like, "I can't not have this in my life."
You need it. So your emotionally support DVD. When you've had a bad day, you can just come home, put that on.
It is. Have you seen the new Barbie movie? Because there's a
I
bit of a new
have,
Barbie,
yay!
and my husband was, like, sat next to me, and it was like he was like, "You don't even have to be sad to watch that." Like,
Yeah, I was with my mum and my kids, and they all, both my teenage daughters and my mum, they all turned around and looked at me when it came on. Yeah,
yeah. I
circumstances of your family.
I got
Yes.
the same reaction from my husband, who was just like, "That's you." And I was like, "Shh." Um, so, I mean, you've got some of the feel of her books because you like you were saying, she raises the inequality in people's kind of things in her novels, doesn't she? And you kind of got that in your book as well. You've got sort of with her brother and being accused, and there's all these like sort of elements of different people sort of maybe being treated differently because of who they are.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I really wanted to delve into. Um, I think what she's so good at, and I think why a lot of people find comfort in her work as well, is that she's really good at showing what it's like to be oppressed, to feel oppressed by your society. Like even if that is not on like a drastic level, but is in more of a like kind of a micro level where you're constantly kind of trying to assert your independence. But like in her time, everything was skewed towards men of a certain class. And although the women in her novel still led a pretty privileged life, they suffered under that inequality and they were felt powerless and against that inequality. So I think anybody who's ever felt oppressed by their society can find a home in Jane Austen, even though the circumstances are not quite the same, because she captures that so well, and that feeling of maybe being a little bit outside of your society and looking in. So yeah, that was something that I was really keen to explore, and that makes her such a fantastic sleuth as well, because I think so. I started off my career as a librarian, and I was just fascinated in the public library at the enormous collection of crime that we had. Um, and I started like we were talking to people, all our borrowers that would come in and like scoop up like 5 books, and then they'd be back 5 days later. I was like, "What's going on? Tell me, why are you so in love with this genre? Why is it so popular?" And I think it's because, especially the kind of crime that I write, which I think is defined as like cozy crime where you have an amateur sleuth, it's because you get this cathartic experience of putting things to rights, really, of finding some justice in the world. And I think that experience is really heightened when you've got an amateur sleuth who is the underdog, so who's slightly outside of the society. So if you look at Agatha Christie's most popular sleuths, that's Miss Marple, who everybody underestimates because she's just this funny old lady, and Poirot as well. He doesn't quite fit in with the establishment, and I wanted to get that same feeling with my Jane, in that, in her society, she is the most kind of powerless person because she's a woman, she's young, she's on the fringes. I think we sometimes get her confused with her characters and think that she was more privileged than she was. You maybe think of her as Emma when she's got a lot more in common with Fanny Price or the Dashwood sisters, really. The Austens themselves didn't really have that much money. They were kind of on the fringes of the gentry. So her dad was a clergyman. Um, he was very lucky to be given a living by his wealthy cousin, and the family kind of just above. They're we've got his accounts, and his accounts show that he was always slightly spent more than he earned from like his tithes as a clergyman and through farming. So yeah, she's not impoverished, but she's not wealthy. And none of her money is her own. She doesn't have an independent income. Um, she's not, high up the social class, and she's a woman. So she's always fighting against that to kind of have a say and to be taken seriously. And I was trying to it's kind of like an allegory for how she was in her work as well, because that's how she was treated. That I mean, the literary establishment for a long time, fobbed her off as women's novels were for women and they were ephemeral and maybe it's just for girls. But she shaped and she defined and she perfected the novel. So yeah, she's my hero.
What I found interesting recently is that the Bronte sisters, I think it was like Charlotte Bronte, wasn't a big fan of.
She hated her, didn't she? She hated Jane
Mhm.
Austen. Yeah, and I kind of get it. I think, I mean, I loved the
Yeah.
Brontes too, but I think, the
When
Brontes, I mean, they got accused at the time of writing quite coarse novels because they explored some really dark subjects and some really, psychological and, um psychological, quite troubling things, and they brought things to the page that other women kind of hadn't done before, like mental illness and obsessive love, um, and it was very kind of improper for their society. So they were a very different kind of literature, kind of much more serious. And Jane Austen is writing satire and it's humor. And I think the thing with humor is that you either get it or you don't, and I just don't think they got it. They didn't find it funny, whereas I find it hilarious.
Yeah, no, she is hilarious, isn't she? You've only got to see it in the adaptations, I think, where it comes you hear the dialogue sort of being spoken that she's written and you realise the humour that's there
Yeah,
throughout.
yeah, and I think it'll be the same with my readers. There'll be readers who do find it really funny, um, and there'll be other readers who it doesn't. It doesn't tickle them like in the same way. But yeah, it's really funny. There's a letter from Charlotte Bronte where she's read Pride and Prejudice, and she says something like, "I couldn't bear to live with these people. They would stifle me." And she's almost got it because that is the point. That is the point of Pride and Prejudice. It is unbearable and it is stifling. But yeah, either it's funny or it's not.
We've got some hellos from Sam, uh, Donna, and Karen Taylor.
Hello.
Karen has gone back to the research question. She says she loves the family detail in the opening chapters. And it must have taken some real research to get right. You do indeed thank some historians of Jane Austen in your acknowledgements, don't you?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I think it did take time, but I think for me, what happened with this book, it wasn't that I decided to write a book about Jane Austen and then sit down and do the research. It was more that I'd spent 25 years kind of casually obsessed with Jane Austen until I needed to do something with that. I needed to express that in a way. I had all these thoughts and feelings and questions and comments that I wanted to make. So it was, how was I going to do that? I'm not a historian. I'm never going to write a straight biographical fiction. So I leaned into what I did do. I was already writing. This is the first novel that I've ever published, but it's not the first novel that I've ever written. And I've all got, those tend to call them those novels in the drawer or on the shelf, Jane Austen called them, the ones that she didn't publish. There's novels that sat on the shelf, kind of waiting for the day when you could dust them off and fix them and make them ready for publication. Or that you just write as a learning experience, really. And I was writing one before this, which was a mystery, but it was also a romance, and it was just trying to do a little bit too much. Um, and I'd based the main character of that very much on Jane Austen. So she was born in that time because I knew so much about that era. So if I was going to write a historical novel, I thought the best way to do that was to base it on the historical figure who I knew most about, and that was Jane Austen. So yeah, she was born in the same year. She had a sister who she was really close to, and she was kind of solving a murder. And then the responses that I got to that from my writing group, obviously something was working because they'd say things like, "Oh, she's very Lizzie Bennet, isn't she, your heroine?" And then I was thinking about like, do I edit that and make it into maybe like a dual point of view romance? And then I realized that what I should do really was go completely the other way and make it a crime, forget trying to be the romance writer like Jane Austen was, and lean into the crime aspect of it, and to come out and proudly say, "Yeah, this is based on Jane Austen. This is her life." So yeah, I've really really enjoyed several of the Jane Austen biographies. I think the ones um, that I couldn't have written this novel without were the Claire Tomalin and the Lucy Worsley, and also the historian Deirdre Le Fay, who it was only in the, like, 80s or 90s when, her w her she started appearing on kind of university syllabuses, um, and being respected as such a great author, as part of the canon of English literature, and it was only then that anyone really thought to go around and collect up all of her papers, so all of her letters, and all of the letters about her from her family, and put them in one volume and share them and kind of really detail them with notes about who all the people are that she's referring to, who all the places are, where all the places are that she's referring to. So yeah, this book is kind of my Bible. It goes everywhere with me. You can see all the all the notes on the side, and that's Jane Austen's Letters by Deirdre Le Fay. And a lot of the impressions that I'd got of the characters were based straight on that. It was like I had these people existed on my head from what I'd read, and then it was like, okay, and if I put them in this situation, how do they all react?
There's a moment in the book that I really like where she talks to the person who's like the magistrate, and he's essentially only the magistrate because he's like the rich man in the area, and he has no idea what he's talking about. And she basically is sort of trying to say to him, "You've got no idea what you're talking about," and he
It's
just
it's madness, isn't it? It's
yeah.
madness. So the way that magistrates worked, um, and it's very different now. So after being a librarian, I was a communications consultant, and I was very lucky to work to a short project for about a year at the Royal Courts of Justice, and I got to work with some of the senior members of the judiciary, the kind of senior criminal judges, and the who look after the magistrates. So I know like how different it is now. Um, but like doing that role, learning about the history of the legal profession and realizing, like tracking it back to how it was then, and it was basically, yeah, if you're a landowner, the only people that can be magistrates are landowners. And basically, if you're a landowner, it's seen as something that you really ought to do. Like, you should do your duty by sitting as a magistrate every now and again. And they get, yeah, no training, no expertise. You just happen to be the richest guy in the vicinity. So that's you. And most of them were the main bread and butter was poaching, that the cases that they were like called to investigate, it was poaching. It was, I mean, the law was so different then that lots of the crimes we wouldn't even think about as crimes these days. So it was having a child outside of wedlock, um, not giving the child's father's name to the parish so that they can then be pursued to look after that child rather than the parish having to take care of it. So yeah, yeah. And what was what was really helpful in that, and in thinking about how the investigation would work, was looking at real murders that had happened and how they were investigated. So there was a really famous case just at the beginning, so a few years later after the book's set, the beginning of the 19th century, um, called the Ratcliffe Highway Murders, which were in London, I think East London. Um, where like an entire family were killed, like a husband and a wife and a baby were all murdered. And it was the first kind of like it was one of the first kind of famous serial killers because he went on to kill some other victims a few days later. And the police just had no idea how to investigate. They weren't really a policeman then. There was the magistrate, as I said, who was a volunteer, and then a parish constable who was a local volunteer. Um, and they had no idea of kind of how forensic science worked. So they immediately kind of destroyed the scene and they moved the and you'll recognize this from the plot. They moved the body immediately onto the bed, lay out this family from where they were actually killed, and they're much more spiritual than us, the Georgians. So they thought that if you spent time with the corpse of a murder victim, then their spirit might be able to communicate to you what had happened and help you solve the crime. So they invited basically the whole of East London to traipse through this house, this murder scene, and look at the corpse and then write and give their theories to the police as to what might have happened. So that's what happens in the book. The murder victim is laid out in the house, and the entire county, including Jane, is invited to go around and have a look at her. And I had huge trouble convincing my editor at first that that would really happen. It was I had to like kind of weave it, do a bit more world building in the story to make it seem plausible that that's how a magistrate and the investigating authorities at the time would actually behave, how they would treat a crime like that.
So your Twitter feed, as you've been like publicizing the book, is glorious because you have like Regency dresses and like you've
I get a little
thoroughly
bit carried away.
edited.
I do. So I love to do the academic research, as I hope you can tell. But then there came a point where that wasn't enough. I really wanted to step inside her world and see what it felt like to kind of physically inhabit her world. So I did lots of um, peculiar hobbies, kind of led in the lead up to it. So I've got a little flock of chickens. That Austen's heroines quite often keep chickens when they get their independence. So Charlotte Lucas, her consolation in marrying Mr. Collins is she's very happy with her poultry yard. And then Austen's mum kept chickens as well. They did. She grew up on basically on a farm, a small farm. And then I tried to learn how to ride a horse, but it turns out that's not very easy in your early 40s. I fell off the horse, and some of my feelings about the horse might come through in the story as to Jane's feelings about the horse. Um, and then what was much easier was sewing Regency costumes. So, yeah, my mum sewed a lot when we were kids growing up. Like we didn't have that much money, and she'd always like make all of our clothes. And so, yeah, I learned to sew kind of sitting next to her. Um, and now it's great because I can follow a pattern and I can work a sewing machine and I can sew all these amazing Regency costumes. And the other thing that was really, really fun was I persuaded my husband to come with me to a few Regency balls as well and learn how to do the Regency dancing, which is really fascinating. Like, it's one of my favorite things to watch on the adaptations. And then, you read the bits in Austen's books where people are talking to each other while the dancing is going on, and you realize how good you have to be in order to like carry out a conversation with someone because some of them are really, really fast and you have to really concentrate on what you're doing. But yeah, it just gave me that whole different kind of perspective on how people moved, how comfortable they are, what you could do in those clothes compared to what you couldn't do in those clothes, how restrictive it might be. Um, and yeah, for writing the ballroom scenes, it was just fantastic. And I think what I tried to do throughout the novel was think about what skills would Austen have, what things does she do in her daily life that might help her solve the case. And so I have her like shopping and visiting the neighbours. And one of my favourite things was in the middle, there's a scene where she has to look for the murderer by dancing with as many gentlemen as possible. And obviously, that was just me getting really carried away with the whole joke of like, how can she be the best detective? She's got to dance her way to victory.
Love it. Um, yeah, I admired the Regency costume. I thought that was ace.
It's very flattering and it's very comfortable, actually. You should try
You're
it.
very in good company in the authors in our group, 'cause one of our favourite questions we ask people is if they've acted out anything, like practicing their books, or writing their books, and we've got so many crazy answers over the years. And I feel like making your own Regency costume and learning how to ride a horse and stuff just fits right in.
It really does give you a whole perspective, 'cause I think that's what novelists are always trying to do, isn't it? Like, we've imagined this world, and we're always trying to get as close to it as we possibly can, and the best way really is through your imagination. But yeah, we do like to, experiment.
You really sensitively handle like her brother George and her. I'm trying to think if it's her nephew, like the
Yeah,
other
Hastings.
Elizabeth.
Oh, he's a cousin, but it feels like he's her nephew. I often
Yeah,
get confused. And he did become her nephew because so his mum
yeah,
is Eliza Defeed,
yeah,
I think it's pronounced. Wrote the whole book. I still don't know how to pronounce it. So yeah, Austen's well, there were actually a few family members who had disabilities, but only George and Hastings made it into the novel. So um, George had learning difficulties, and we know that he had epilepsy because he had fits, and that's Jane Austen's elder brother. Um, he was the second of the eight children. He's about 10 years older than Jane. And then her cousin Eliza de Fied had a little boy, Hastings, who suffered from a similar complaint. Um, and there was actually an uncle, Mrs. Austen's brother, who also suffered from learning difficulties. And in real life, when George was a bit older, so they were all looked after by their dry nurse in the village, um, Austen until she was about two. And George stayed there until he was much older. So he was there at the same time that Austen was there. And then he went to live with a local family with that uncle. So they were together, looked after by a local family. Um, but yeah, in the book, it's just George, and he that was the one that was a real motivator for me in writing the story, because I always felt it was so terribly unfair when in some biographies, especially like biographies that are much older and might have been written by gener- kind of generations down of Austen's, um, they sometimes leave him out, or they say that she didn't have a relationship with him. And I think it's really that erasure is kind of really unfair, because one of the paradoxes about Austen is that we do know a lot about her life, but at the same time we don't know hardly anything about her life, because unlike other writers, she never left us her letters and her papers. So we estimate that she wrote about 3,000 letters during her lifetime. And actually, Cassandra, her sister, had a big bonfire when she kind of felt that she was getting to the end of her life, and she destroyed nearly all of Jane's papers. Only 161 letters survive. And I think Austen maybe even asked her to do it. I think it's the equivalent of asking your sister to delete your entire WhatsApp after you died, because those letters were never like written for publication. They were personal, frank letters, often quite scathing about her friends and family. So I think there was a protection thing going on there. And then her biographers, her first biographers, were her family. So one of her nephews in the kind of Victorian age wrote the first biography of her, and he asked the family to remember her. And it was Victorian times, so they made her very palatable to a Victorian audience, um, and presented her as a very humble, prim, proper Victorian kind of spinster. Um, but she wasn't quite like that. I don't think if you read her letters, you get a very different impression of her. Um, so yeah, poor George got erased during that. Um, but there are references to him and people quite often say he never lived with the family. But the thing is with the Georgians as a whole, they had a very, very different look on family as we have. So it's hard to find a time when all 8 of the children are actually living together in the house with the mum and dad, because all of them go out to they're weaned at about 3 months, and then they go out to live with a local family until they're about 2 or 3 years old, and then they come home. And then the boys, so the eldest boys who went to university, they were her dad was a schoolmaster, and then Henry and James went off to university at Oxford when they were about 14. Frank and Charles, the Sailor brothers, went to Naval Academy when they were 11 and 12. Who's the one who got adopted by the wealthy relations, he starts going on extended stays with them when he's about 11. And Cassandra and Jane first went to boarding school when they were 7 and 9. So they don't like for them child rearing, you can outsource that, and it doesn't mean you're like a bad parent or you don't love those children. It's takes a village, I think, in Georgian times. Um, so and then so I don't think the fact that George didn't live with the family is necessarily evidence that they didn't love him or they didn't care about him. They looked after him all his life. He led, from what I can tell, a very happy and dignified life with this local family. He was never, and at that time nobody would have blinked an eye if somebody like George had been relegated to an institution. They chose to always look after him, and even when the parents died, all his brothers kind of clubbed together to pay for this family to continue to look after him. And then there are references to George none in Jane Austen's letters, but as we know, they're like heavily edited. And then there are references to him in his mum's letters, where she's worried about him and worried about his fits when he's very small. And then there's a letter from Mr. Austen where he's reflecting on his son's condition, and he says, "We have this consolation: he cannot be a bad or wicked child." It's quite a strange quote to our ears, but I think it's like reflecting on how vulnerable and how much he means to them, and yeah, that he's the member of the family who most has to be kind of treasured or looked after. So my big mission with Miss Austen Investigates was, how do I make George the heart of the story? And yeah, to do that, I'm afraid I had to send him to jail, and I based that crime on another crime which happened in the Austen family. So Jane Austen's aunt, Mrs. Lee Perrot, was a very wealthy woman, and in 1799 she was arrested and tried for shoplifting in Bath. So she'd gone into a haberdashery and she'd bought a card of lace, some black lace, and when she got outside, they challenged her, and there was some white lace in it as well. And they actually tried her and arrested her, and because there were so many capital crimes in Georgian England, there were over 200 crimes which carried the death penalty, um, and this lace was worth over 60 shillings, so it would have carried the death penalty. Um, and for her, that sentence probably would have been commuted to transportation because of the low value. Um, so yeah, the idea was, when I read that quote about Georgie, I just thought, oh, what if I took that like terrible, beloved, honourable person and put him in this position that she was in? Would that be enough to get Jane to go out and solve her first mystery?
I think, yeah. I mean, it's a good kind of motivation, but you also kind of handle them really sensitively as characters. I
Thank
think, which is
you.
quite
Yeah,
nice.
that really means a lot. Thank you. That was the one thing that I just wanted to get across, was that was there anybody who I wanted people to see themselves and the society, the real society around them, and maybe their friends and their family reflected in this novel, because I think if you just watch the Hollywood adaptations of Austen, you might get this impression of this, like, world where everybody's perfect. And actually, her real life was a lot more diverse than that, and a lot more inclusive than that. And I really wanted to bring that bring that intention and that energy to Miss Austen Investigates. And yeah, that means a lot.
Yeah, it was really well managed. And I think sort of even when things happen to like Hastings and George in the book, you feel like that sort of sense of love and care for them.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, like we do have Eliza's letters about her son Hastings, and she adored that boy. That it's so. I think that's one of the things that's so interesting about the Austen family as a whole is that 200 years later, I mean longer, you read those letters, and it's obvious how much they love each other, even when Eliza's in France and she's writing home, and Jane's writing to her brothers in the West Indies, and there's just this. So one of the things that was just so inspiring and that just brought them alive to me was just this sense of love through really difficult situations.
So going away from Jane Austen and the books, although we will come back to them, what have you read this year, and what were your reads of last year? Tell us some of your
Um,
favourite
so
reads
the
recently.
best thing about being a published author is that I have been given all sorts of really exciting proofs from all my other a lot of debut crime writers. And I was saying to you before we came on, that one of the best things has been Jenny Godfrey's The List of Suspicious Things, which comes out very shortly, which is, I think, again, like looking at using crime to look at women's lives really, and what it means to be a woman, and what it means to be in a society that's not necessarily kind of friendly to you. And The List of Suspicious Things is about the hunt for the Yorkshire Rippers, but it's not told through the eyes of like the police or what you might expect. It's told through the eyes of a 12-year-old girl who's kind of learning what it means to be a woman, and um, in the kind of backdrop of this fear. And it really captures Yorkshire, and it also really captures like my era of being a child, so growing up in the 80s. And yeah, that really made a huge mark on me, that book. um, and then like other books that I've read that are not crime are Goodbye Birdie Greenwing by Erica Waller, which just I read that in 24 hours. That made me cry. That's coming out in the spring as well, which is a really bittersweet story about saying goodbye to someone. Um, and yeah, another couple of really, really good crime debuts. So The Antique Hunter's Guide to Murder is really fantastic, and that's looking at the kind of the antiques world through crime as well, and the kind of murky things there, and great female sleuth. Um, and then I Love a Female Sleuth. So Kate Wells has just published her second book in the Malvern Farm mysteries. Um, and again, that's like a woman on a farm, like in a man's world, and solving these crimes, solving the murders. And it's like a beautiful, beautiful setting. Like murders shouldn't be taking place here, and how do we kind of like fix this and move on? Yeah, so many great books. I love historical fiction as well. So yeah, we'd be here for hours. It's really great getting a chance to read everything before it comes out.
It is. It's a little. I got your book as a proof, and it was so. It was sat on my pile for a while, and I was like, I must read it a bit closer to the chat so that it's like fresh in my mind. But it was like tormenting me for a while. It was there, and it was like, you really want to read me, but you can't just yet. um, but yeah, that was a good one. I really like historical fiction too.
Do you? Yeah, another one I've just read is The Painter's Daughters by Emily Howes. And that's about the two daughters of Gainsborough, the painter, and they had a interesting relationship because one of them kind of suffered from mental confusions. So yeah, it's about like mental illness in the 18th century, and yeah, it's like lovely things like the paintings and Bath and balls and society and romance, and then also this kind of sisterly love that endures through really difficult times. Yeah, I loved that one.
My favourite book of last year was Maiden by Kate Foster. I don't know if you've read that one.
Oh, I haven't. No. I'll
It
look it
won
up.
the
Is that historical?
won the debut prize for Bloody Scotland, and it's historical, but it's based on a real crime. It's
Wow.
a famous ghost story in Corstorphine in Edinburgh. Like, it's on the fringe of Edinburgh now. It's about a woman who murdered her uncle and lover.
I need this.
It's really good.
It sounds
It's really good.
exactly my kind of book.
And you kind of get the trial and then like sort of coffee house reports and things. And I was genuinely convinced that these were real like newspaper articles at the
Yeah.
time, and they're written by the author. And I was like, I thought you'd actually found
Oh, that
real
sounds
things.
absolutely amazing. I love it.
It's genuinely brilliant. Yeah, heartily recommend it
Brilliant.
especially if you like historical fiction.
I do. I do. Yeah, I don't know. I love the kind of book where you're reading it and then you're so inspired to go and Google what really happened, or like Google the source and was that a real newspaper? I love like falling down to those little wormholes of like, could this really happen, and well, how did the real story turn out? Yeah, love it.
I like the ones where there's real characters in as well. So like you've got Jane Austen. There's a really good series that has like Robert Hooke and his associate
Oh yeah.
investigating crimes. And so you know that the people are real. And I guess you can go away, like with the Maiden, you can go away and
Yeah.
Google what happens. You know, there's real fact behind it, so you kind of know what's going to happen. But the fiction sort of still lifts it and takes it somewhere interesting.
Yeah, I've read the Bronte mysteries, by Ellis Bell. I love those. Yeah, they're the same kind of feeling. It's like, what influenced them, what was going on in those like three sisters' imagination to get them to write those novels. I really enjoy those.
I'm still working through those. Um, but yeah, I love those three. The Bronte mysteries are great. You have got in the back of this, I think there's sort of hints of another one. Like there's going to
Very
be.
much, very much. Yeah. So, um, the kind of idea when I sat down to write this series, there's so much that I wanted to say about Jane Austen's life, in terms of like the relationships that were important to her and the places that shaped her. Um, that in order to make this first one manageable, I thought about it from the beginning as a series and kind of planned out what I would tackle in each book to tell this story really of her as a young woman, finding her voice and the difficulties that she struggled with in order to get into print and leave us her legacy. So I kind of mapped out that arc and thought about the instances that I would really like to cover. And then what that allowed me to do was to really focus on this one moment with this first book. And it's the moment that her letters begin when she's just met Tom Lefroy. So it's really exciting. It's the first kind of insight into her mind. And then the next one is set about 18 months later, and it's in Kent. And it's, as I mentioned, her brother, Neddy. He the Austins had these really rich cousins, the Knights, who had the big house and were like the characters from her books. Um, and they didn't have any children of their own. And they took a liking to Edward Austen, who was like the third brother. Um, he was just a really nice boy, apparently. They went to visit the Austins and he was about 11. He was really kind of nice looking and charming and just really nice, easygoing natured. And they started to invite him to stay with them. And then when they realized they weren't going to have any children of their own, or perhaps decided not to try for children of their own, they asked if they could adopt him. And I think it was quite a hard decision for his parents. There's, according to the family legends, like his dad was like, "Oh, we can't do it," and then his mum was like, "I think, my dear, you had better let the child go." Um, so he goes off to live with his wealthy cousins, and he's taught how to be a young man. He's like sent on his grand tour. Anyway, so my book is about Jane going to his world. So it's 18 months later. Um, and she travels to Kent for the summer to look after his children and to help her sister-in-law, who's due to give birth again. And it's not normally something that Jane would do, but Cassandra Austen, her sister, has just had the most devastating news that her fiance has died in the West Indies. So Jane is going to take her place. And then when she gets down there, she realizes that actually her time would be better off spent investigating this mysterious young woman who has turned up out of nowhere and is claiming to be a shipwrecked princess who's been abducted by pirates and held for ransom. And this looks off to Jane, and she's claiming sanctuary with Neddy's adoptive mother. Um, so she realizes she needs to get in there and find out what's really happening. Otherwise, the enormous inheritance that all of the Austins are expecting and have come to rely on really could be stolen out from underneath Neddy's nose.
Ooh, sounds very exciting. So, how many do you plan for there to be in the series?
Well, my books are not retellings, but they're kind of shadow books to Austen's books. So I try and look at the same themes. So the first book, Miss Austen Investigates, the one that's just been published, is very much a kind of ode to Northanger Abbey. So you can see like there's the gothic elements, and there's Jane is very much in her Catherine Morland era, kind of getting a bit carried away with her imagination and accusing everyone. And then in the second book, it's kind of an ode to Sense and Sensibility. So there's the whole kind of really painful relationship between Jane watching Cassandra absolutely fall apart with grief after losing her fiance. And then there's Jane's relationship with the princess as well, with this young woman who's turned up that's kind of like a mirror image of each other in the same way that Eleanor and Marianne in Sense and Sensibility are mirroring each other and contrasting each other. So Austen wrote 6 complete novels, so I think there's definitely 6 Miss Austen Investigates, at least, I
Excellent.
hope.
Of the 6 complete novels, do you have a favorite?
Oh, it's so hard to choose. So my favorite is usually the one that I am rereading or listening to, because I tend to listen to them most at the moment. My favorite is like Juliet Stevenson on audio, reading them aloud, and I'll be walking the dog or doing the laundry, and I just burst out laughing because she's such a good performance and she's so funny. So I am in my Sense and Sensibility era at the moment, but I have to say that I think Pride and Prejudice isn't just Jane Austen's greatest novel, it's the greatest novel ever written in the English language. It is absolutely perfect in terms of like character development, the chemistry between the characters, the plot, everything about it is absolutely perfect. What about you?
It makes some really profound points, Pride and Prejudice as well, doesn't it? I quite like
Yeah.
you go back and realise like Charlotte deciding that Mr. Collins is like good for her
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
end.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So many great female characters in it. I think like, there's a kind of woman for everyone in there that you can identify. There's all the archetypes of like, the monsters and the heroines, and Catherine de Bourgh for me is such an amazing character. I love her.
love it. Yeah, Pride and Prejudice high on the list. Northanger Abbey
Yeah.
also very high. Big
Good.
fan.
It doesn't get enough love, I think, Northanger Abbey.
No,
It's brilliant. Yeah.
I've got a lot of love for the manga adaptations of them.
Do you? That's
Yeah,
brilliant. So I've got 2 daughters. So one is almost 13 and one is 15. And the 12-year-old is obsessed with manga. And I recently managed to get her to introduce her to Austen through Manga Sense and Sensibility. And so what she's always asking me to buy the next book, and they're really expensive, obviously, mangas, because they're wonderful. So I bought her Sense and Sensibility, and I was like, when you've read that, I will buy you the next book in your manga series. And I she came in and she said, I've read it, I'll give you the next one. And I decided to test her by quizzing her. And I was like, okay, so you've read it, like, what do you think of it? And she's like, I hate Willoughby. It's like, you have read it. I know you've read it. If you've got that from it, Willoughby's like a real jerk. That's it. I know you've read it. You can have the next book in the series. But yeah, it was wonderful because I think that because I only like I tried to give it straight over to her, but I held on to it for quite a while because I couldn't resist reading it because I think the dialogue is taken straight from the books, isn't it?
Hmm. It is. They're really well adapted, and they're quite. If you haven't got time to dip and read the entire like novel, because I will reread the novels every now and again, but if you haven't got the time, you can just dip into like the manga one, and they're a lot quicker to read. So they're quite nice for a sort of short term fix.
Yeah, I think like the thing is that the reason that Austen's like books lend them so well to adaptation is I think it's because she was like such a great fan of the theatre. She loved the theatre so much, and her dialogue is so good. There's almost a play there that you can just like lift straight out, and the dialogue does so much work that it's perfect for manga. Yeah, I was really obviously like I'm always trying to get my kids into Jane Austen, and obviously me being their mum means that they're probably going to roll their eyes every time Jane Austen's mentioned. But I was really proud of that. That was really successful. I was really happy that that she liked that. And I've bought her the manga Frankenstein for Christmas. Try and get her into a bit of Mary Shelley as well.
They're all quite good. I've got manga Anna Green Gables as well.
Very nice. It's a new addiction coming on, I feel, for me.
Yeah, no, they're well worth it. I mean, there's some really good manga series, but we're quite nerdy in my house. We do have a lot of graphic novels, but
Same. Same. Her bedroom is just like it's like walking into the manga section at the library. It's just walls of it. But it's she's reading, and I love that she has her passion and will do anything to support her passion. It's
I'm
good.
a big believer as a teacher and just as a reader in general that as long as you're reading, it doesn't actually matter what format.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. My mum used to say that, and I read like the Beano, the Dandy, My Guy, like all the magazines she used to buy us, Just 17, and I get so excited every week when those magazines come out, and it's just, yeah, the joy of sitting down with like a printed, like sitting down with words and, enjoying them. I think it sets you up well in life.
It does, and I think it should be encouraged, whatever format it's in.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Like that's my thing. But obviously, I grew up and started a book group, so
Yeah,
no, it was already there. But I think if you grow up reading, it's definitely a good thing.
yeah, yeah, I think so. I think so. I think, especially like it's it's nice to be able to escape, and it's nice to see yourself, I think, reflected, or if you're having like difficulties, to see yourself and the things that you're going through and things that you're struggling with, I think reflected in books. It's a really, for me, like personally, that's how I work things out. That's how I deal with the experience. That's my therapy. Yeah, it's reading.
What book events have you got coming up? Because obviously you're kind of in the launch window.
Yes, yeah. So I've going to a library next week, which obviously is a former library, and I'm really excited about. So we're going back into the library as an author. Um, so yeah, that's in Hillingdon. And then I'm hoping to take part in the Bath Literary Festival. Um, any excuse to go to Bath, and like a later book. So neither of these two first books are set in Bath, but obviously like Bath is Jane Austen central, and later books in the series will definitely be set in Bath. So I feel like I need to go and do some more research. Um, so yeah, those two are confirmed at the moment. And then yeah, hopefully more will come in now that the book's published. And yeah, it'd be really lovely to go out and speak to people. It's lovely to do it online as well. It's great to come here tonight, speak to you.
But there is a lot of like crime festivals and things that are like,
Yeah, yeah. I'll be at Harrogate, but not like speaking, just as a turn up kind of thing at Harrogate and watch everybody else. Um, but yeah, if there's any like around the south coast of England or London or yeah, or on a train ride away, then yeah, yeah, be fun to do.
well, there's Crime Fest in Bristol,
Yeah, I went to that last year, Crime Fest in Bristol. Yeah, it was really good. I really
and
enjoyed
there's
it.
Capital Crime in London.
And I was going to go to that, but I had COVID, so I sent a friend along with my ticket. But yeah, I think this year I'd really like to do the Capital Crime one. But Bristol was great because I went to university in Bristol, and I hadn't been back there in like 20 years, I don't think. So it was really nice last year to go back and see Bristol and see how it had changed. It was lovely. And try and find my way around. And I did find it was kind of a muscle memory. I would kind of know like where to go, which streets and stuff, even though like it had changed so much. Yeah, it was a
It's
really good
nice
one.
to do that, isn't it?
Mm,
I I still live where I went to university. I just did the lazy
yeah,
thing of going to university and never leaving.
yeah. Which are you in the city? 'Cause I know you're in
Yeah,
Yorkshire. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
where are
In
you?
Leeds.
Oh, lovely. Oh, Leeds is beautiful. Oh, no wonder you stayed. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I really liked. Is I think I'm quite familiar with the kind of south of coast of England and going on these like Austin day trips. So it was really nice for me to go to Harrogate last year because that was a total new part of the world for me to go up um, and see that beautiful Georgian architecture up there. Um, yeah,
You can go to Haworth as well and see all like the Bronte.
I definitely on my bucket list is going to Haworth, and my husband actually was brought up in the Lake District, so we have done that a couple of times. We've gone up to the Lake District and gone to Grasmere and seen like Dove Cottage or Wordsworth, and his sister Dorothy Wordsworth lived. That was real lovely, kind of northern literary pilgrimage as well.
Yeah, you can do Haworth from like Harrogate, Leeds. It's pretty easy.
Yeah, yeah, and Elizabeth Gaskell's house I'd like to go and see as well. Yeah.
If you like the Railway Children, you can combine a visit to the Bronte Parsonage Museum with a bit of a Railway Children moment because they filmed it on the Keighley steam
Mm.
train.
Oh, I would like to see that. Yeah.
So doing a bit of a mixture. I go to Harrogate every year, so I will look out
Oh, brilliant.
and bring my copy of Miss Austen to your
Yes,
time.
please, please come and find me in the big tent. Yeah, as I said, that's what I really loved about Harrogate. So was like because it's all in one place and you really get to like see so many people. It's funny. It felt like a much smaller event than it is. I felt like, by the end of that weekend, I'd go in the tent and kind of like really recognize everyone. And the most last year, did you see Lucy Worsley's speech? Oh, she gave a talk about Agatha Christie. So obviously, I'm a bit of a Lucy Worsley fangirl. Because she did the Jane biography. She did A Very British Murder, which was one of my kind of core texts in writing this book as well. That's where I got all the Ratcliffe murder stuff from. I love her podcast. Do you ever listen to her podcast about
If you listen to a podcast, I got into Lucy Worsley with the Very British Murder. Then I bought the Jane Austen one to prepare for your chat.
that is dedication.
I got because I was I know the history of the Brontes. I know but I
Yeah,
love Jane Austen, but I don't know anything about her, at
yeah.
all. I feel like if I'm going to interview someone who's done all this research, I should know, not just read the book. I should know some of the history.
You're quizzing
So
me, not the other way around.
I prepared properly. um, but yeah, I'm like utterly addicted. And my dad bought me like another one to read. And then for Christmas, I got so many Lucy Worsley books because I just love her.
Excellent, excellent. And
Um,
I love the way that she dresses up as well. She's a serious historian and she dresses up. But yeah, there's a podcast she does
I love
called
her.
Lady
She dresses
Killers.
up. She does this.
Yeah. Yeah, Lady Killers, and it looks at female murderers through a kind of feminist lens. So yeah, when the book that you mentioned, The Maiden, kind of reminded me of that as well, and I was thinking, "I wonder if it's covered in that." Um, yeah, it's really, really addictive. I love it, that podcast.
I'll have to have a look. But yeah, I've not come across the podcast yet, but I'm reading a Agatha Christie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So good, isn't it?
They're so good. We've got so remind everyone just before we finish of like what they're going to go away and buy. I've
Okay,
got
so Miss Austen Investigates. It's out by Penguin Michael Joseph. You can see behind me. Oh, I don't know which way to move. Oh, I can't reach it. Oh, hang on. The front cover looks like this. Little Jane on the front cover. Miss Austen Investigates by Jessica Bull in all good bookshops and wherever you find your books. Thank you. It's so lovely to come and talk to you.
and thanks so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, thank you. Bye bye.